Good afternoon, everyone in the United States. Good evening, everyone, I hope, who's tuning in from Israel. I'm delighted to welcome you. My name is Nancy Sinkoff. I'm the Academic Director of the Alan and Joan Bildner Center for the Study of Jewish Life. And it's my great pleasure and honor and just delight to introduce our first event of the fall semester, and it's entitled Dance and Disability in Israel. This is the Schwartzman Endowed Seminar, and our speaker is giving a public talk today, and we'll be giving a faculty and graduate student seminar on Tuesday. Let me give you a sense of the ground rules, just to remind everyone we're still in Zoom land, and then I will introduce our speaker. This is a webinar format, and all of you are muted. If you want to ask a question, and I hope you will, and there'll be a lot of rich material that I'm sure is not so familiar to many of you, please pose it, put it in the chat, and I will moderate the questions and pose them to our speaker in the second part of the program. This webinar is being recorded, so you can share it later with friends and colleagues and family members. It will be, meaning the link will be on the Bildner Center's website. And so you can listen to it again if there are things you missed, or just share it with people whom you know are interested in issues of disability studies and dance, ethnography, and anthropology. So as I said, it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Gili Hammer, our speaker today. She is an associate professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology and the program in Cultural Studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Her doctoral research, which she did at the Hebrew University, focused on the social construction of gender and femininity among blind women, and on the cultural understandings of blindness and sight in the Israeli public sphere. Her current research, which is what today's talk is drawing from, examines sensory practices and embodied politics within the disability culture phenomenon, exploring integrated dance projects that bring together dancers with and dancers without disabilities in both the United States and in Israel. Her work focuses on what she calls corporeal or bodily otherness, how it is represented, how it is negotiated, and how the public sphere understands and regulates it, and the meaning in the public of diverse body types, how that plays out in our public lives. Her fields of research are interdisciplinary. She draws from disability studies, anthropology of the senses, gender studies, visual culture studies, anthropology, sociology, and performance studies. So it's Dr. Hammer has a multidisciplinary approach, which I think really she is so well suited to do this, but also her topics are well suited. She can ask questions from literally different angles: physical, sociological, anthropological, and otherwise. So I'm just delighted that she's here. Her first book is entitled Blindness Through the Looking Glass: The Performance of Blindness, Gender, and the Sensory Body. It came out in 2019, but today's talk is again on integrated dance. So I welcome Dr. Hammer. She will speak, my guess is around 35 minutes, 40 minutes, give or take, and then we will open it up to a discussion and chat, and then I will close with giving you some teases about other programming upcoming at the Bildner Center. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nancy, for this generous introduction. And before I'll share my presentation, I really wanted to thank Professor Nancy Sinkoff and Professor Jeff Friedman, who together invited me to this shared remote residency with Rutgers, really making this happen across countries, academic disciplines, and time zones, offering an innovative intellectual vision that brings together dance, disability, anthropology, and Jewish studies. I would also like to thank administrative staff Karen Small, Josh Schwartz, and Jenny German for their help with all the administrative work that was around this talk. In my 40-minute talk today, as Nancy said, I'll share some insights from my ethnography in Israel and the United States in the field of integrated dance, bringing together dancers with and without disabilities. I'll share with you mainly integrated dance in the Israeli context, and specifically the way integrated dance may reinforce hierarchy and divisions around social categories, and at the same time, it may challenge them and deconstruct boundaries. And I'll show you one ethnographic example of each. I'll start though with an introduction to my broader work, and we'll dive into arguments and examples later on. So I'll start sharing my screen, and if there's any problem seeing or hearing me, please let me know. Okay, so a few words about myself. I'm a social anthropologist, and for the last 15 years, I've been studying performance of disability, which is the ways people with and without disabilities present and negotiate their notions and definitions about disabilities and abilities. I began this study through the performance of the everyday life, as in the example of my 2019 book, Blindness Through the Looking Glass. In this research, I studied blind women's gender performance and the ways women who do not rely on sight as a central sensory medium participate, negotiate, and interpret gender, visual culture, and social relations. And this study led me to my second study, from which I'll present today, which focused on dance performance. And here you can see one image from the study of two dancers from Axis Dance Company. And my most recent study explores multisensory communication and translation in a deaf-blind theater. And on the screen is an image from the production I documented during this study of two actresses communicating in sign language, the one on the left instructing the one on the right on how to communicate a word in Israeli Sign Language. All of my research can be contextualized within a broader anthropological approach, which as a whole, I would say, is characterized by an interest in exploring the relationships between categories typically considered oppositional and conflicting, and the spaces where these categories are merged. For example, I focus on case studies that challenge the construction of binaries. My study with blind women challenged the assumed conflict between blindness and femininity, and the notion that being feminine to a degree requires the ability to see. My research with dancers with and without disabilities challenges the cultural separation between dance, traditionally associated with ability, strength, and physical capital, and disability, stigmatically associated with weakness, dependency, and lack of physical strength. And in my current study on sign language and integrated theater, I challenge the assumed cultural gap between action and language, what is known as the sensible versus the intelligible. In all of these cases, my anthropological work points out the artificial nature of binaries. Blind women, as my book argued, are not excluded from, but actually active participants in visual culture. Dancers are to some degree obsessed with injuries and potential disability, while people with disabilities are actually expert in movement, aware of the body's involvement in everyday tasks such as walking and breathing even. And sign language, as my current study reveals, really connect the physical action of the body and the sensory knowledge. My study with dancers with and without disabilities is really located in this anthropological approach. I started studying dancers because when I was talking with blind women and working with them, many of them talked about performance and about how just walking down the street, they felt like they give a performance with people whispering about them, pointing at them, staring at them, and they really had to learn how to negotiate or make decisions about this type of everyday performance. And performance is really a central notion in disability studies, as the prominent blind scholar Georgina Kleed noted. You can't be anonymous and invisible to a disabled person out in the world. And this understanding made me very interested in people with disabilities who choose performance as a professional career, the way they negotiate their identity, the way they interact with the audience. And this is how I came to study integrated dance. And some final words of introduction about disability theory before offering examples from my study on integrated dance. My anthropological work resides within disability studies, which is an interdisciplinary field of theory and activism that examines disability from a critical perspective, which, as Ginsburg and Rapp, the pioneer anthropologist of disability, stated, brings in the social, activist, reflexive, experiential, narrative, and phenomenological dimensions of living with particular impairments. My work follows the social model of disability, which really has shifted the focus from the individual body as something needs of cure or therapy to the social environment that disabled people with disabilities, focusing on discrimination, on social barriers, on legislation, on lack of accessibility. And in my study on integrated dance, for example, I focus and ask about lack of training of dancers for dancers with disabilities, or studios which are not accessible, even how low or high is the ballet bar, which some dancers cannot use. But in addition to the social model of disability, I also follow disability studies call to take into consideration the disabled body and what is known as the affirmative model of disability, which really also attends to the body and to the social meaning of it and to the way people with disabilities attend and address their bodies. And in the study on dancers, I take into consideration the kinesthetic experiences about movement in space that dancers develop and the meaning of it for them and how it creates a dialogue between people with different bodies. So I have this diverse approach within disability studies. And I wanted to start with showing two very short segments of videos because it's hard to talk about dance without watching it. The first segment is from a piece called Divide, which featured in 2014 by Axis Dance Company, which is an integrated modern dance company located in Oakland, California. And I had the fortune of studying this piece, interviewing the choreographer, the dancers, watching it on tours and performances. We will watch only 3 minutes of this piece. And the second short segment is from Intimate Duet, it is called, first shown in 2005, but it's still running, by Vertigo, The Power of Balance, which is an integrated contact improvisation project from Israel. And it's very different. It's because it's contact improvisation, it's slower, it focuses more on slow, very small, intimate movements of hands, of fingers. So let's watch these two videos and then come back. So I'm going to turn off my camera and just stop share and start share again with sound. And if something doesn't work, please let me know. Okay, 1 minute.
Billy, we can't see the video.
Oh, okay. And you don't hear it as well?
We can hear it, we just can't see it.
Oh, okay. I'll start again. Sorry. 1 minute. I'll open it in a new window. Okay. Okay. Now you see the screen?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. Okay, let me go to the second video. One moment. I opened the second video, which is of just a very short segment of an integrated contact improvisation. Okay, I'll go back to my PowerPoint. So I hope that these segments, which I'll be happy to answer questions afterwards, are helpful in illustrating some of what drew me to this study. In addition to this art, creativity, and innovation, as an anthropologist, you see me, right? Do you see me? Okay.
Yes.
Yes, we can see you, no problem. And we can
Sorry.
see the PowerPoint.
Something was off with my camera. Sorry. Okay. So as an anthropologist,
Gili, I'm sorry, can you make it full screen? Good. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So for me as an anthropologist, I look at it as an opportunity for us to question and reflect on our conceptions of how a body should move and what it should look like and what disability and ability are. My study then, in terms of research questions, asked first, what type of bodily knowledge is created when people with widely different bodies, and really these companies can include people using different types of wheelchairs with very different types of injuries, dancers with one arm or one leg, dancers using prosthetics, and dancers with cognitive disabilities. So what type of bodily knowledge is created when these people explore their kinesthetic skills, which mean the knowledge and feeling of the movement of one's body and its orientation in space? My second question is, how is this knowledge transmitted and translated across different bodies? And I'm interested in the dialogue that happens among the people working together who have to create this shared work with such different bodies. And the final question is about the implications of this bodily knowledge for other contexts of meeting with the other based on religion, race, gender, or sexuality. So the three questions for me represent the what, the how, and the why of the bodily knowledge created in integrated dance, the components of it, how it is transmitted, and its political importance, which is the topic I'll talk about in Tuesday. In order to answer these questions, I conducted 6 years of anthropological fieldwork with integrated dance companies of different genres, and it included ballet, modern dance, contact improvisation, dance theater, and breakdance in Israel and the United States. I conducted more than 70 interviews with dancers, practitioners, directors, and choreographers and staff members with and without disabilities, and participants and non-participants observations in company classes, rehearsals, outreach programs, and performances. And this is just one image of me in a participant observation. I was a bit younger in anthropology because the study takes so much time, we get older during it. But this was a very rich and wide research. How then is integrated dance manifested in the Israeli context? And before I'll go into the Israeli context, it's important to know that my work always before that, I wanted to show you just 3 examples of the companies I studied. So on the left, you can see an image from Axis Dance Company, the same company we saw Divide. In the middle, we see Luca Patuelli, who is the co-founder and director of embodies, which is an international integrated breakdance crew of dancers with disabilities. And on the right, Chai Cohen and Tali Wertheim, who are the choreographers and directors of Vertigo, the Power of Balance from Israel, who practice integrated contact improvisation. So my study always explores the interplay of the local and the global. Although the research was done in Israel and the United States, its findings can be generalized more broadly to the global phenomenon of disability culture, which integrated dance is part of it, and the question of how bodily knowledge is created and which conditions allow people who are different from one another to meet and work together. From a global perspective, all of the companies I studied shared a common political goal of challenging the common conception of disability as a pathology and lack, and by working with disability as an artistic aesthetic, expanding the boundaries of what is considered a dancing body, freeing it from expectation that it can only be one that is slim, fit, and able. This objective was carried out in varied ways, depending not only on the geographical location of the company, and I interviewed people of Israeli, American, Swedish, Scottish, British, Dutch, Indian, Canadian, and Russian origins, but also on the artistic style and complicated political decisions dancers from all over the world had to make related to questions such as whether to perform in a location that is not accessible for people with disabilities, how to use props such as wheelchairs on stage, whether non-disabled dancers should use them, and if and how to include disability in the content of the art. From a local perspective, specific dilemmas regarding artistic decisions came up, of course, in different contexts. For example, dance companies in the United States discussed intersectionality of race and disability and how to promote racial integration in addition to disability. And dancers in Israel confronted issues related to religion, for example, when required to teach an all-women class of Orthodox participants whose religion forbids them from having a male dance teacher, raising the question of whether to cooperate with this gendered-based segregation, specifically when the male dancer is the teacher with the disability. The Israeli political reality came up also when dancers needed to decide whether to perform in the West Bank, and Ilana Tzobel, for instance, examined this in the context of the performance of Tamar Borer, an Israeli Jewish performance artist with a disability, one of the most influential performers of Buto dance, who raises questions about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The dominant feature of the Israeli context that came forward in my study is related to the historical role of dance in this country as a mechanism for establishing and reinforcing a sense of nationalism and collectivism. Dance in general, not just integrated dance, as many scholars of dance have noted, has served from the very early years of the Israeli state as an expression of Zionism and Jewish identity, defining metaphorically and literally who can join and take part in the Hora circle. And really many people wrote about how it's not a coincidence that people went out to the streets of Tel Aviv and danced folk dance after the declaration of establishment of the state of Israel, and dance really has this deep history in Israel. Integrated dance specifically, since it has to do with the category of disability, needs to be considered also in the context of what has been termed in the literature Israeli ableism, meaning the cultural idealization of the strong, masculine, healthy body of the pioneer, the sabra, the soldier, and the worker, and the resulting exclusion of bodies that deviate from this ideal. The social system works also in such a way that a legitimate disability is one associated with a heroic contribution to society, mainly of IDF veterans, which gives veterans a pathway to inclusion for membership in the collective through their contribution to the national project, so the disability serves as a sort of entrance ticket. And really in Israel, very differently from other places, there is a huge gap between IDF veterans, for example, and people called in national security regular disabilities, people with regular disabilities, in terms of the founding, in terms of the strong of the communities they have, and it's something that happens in Israel. I'll mention just one study about it by Nili Breuer, which is an Israeli scholar of disability culture. And Nili writes about her own experiences in a Israeli wheelchair folk dancing. She uses a wheelchair herself, and she participated in such a class. And she describes the way such dancing utilizes a Zionist version of ableism to promote cultural approval of disability, including the exclusion from the dance group those who fail to present themselves as having overcome disability, showing that public acceptance of Israeli disabled participants as dancers is based on the dancers' symbolic status as soldiers and or overcomers. And overcoming of disability is a very important notion in the medical model that expects people with disabilities to be cured, to go through rehabilitation, and to overcome their disability. And when invited to perform at an important Israeli national dance festival, for example, Nili's group, not all of the dancers in the group were chosen to perform, only the more able-bodied among them. In my study, this uncomfortable reality was also mentioned by dancers who had participated in dance in the context of the IDF veterans community. And I'll give one example that came from my interviews with ID, a 31-year-old woman who defines herself as in the middle between the world of the people with and without disabilities. We met in December of 2016 in her apartment in the center of Israel, a few months after she had begun participating in a training program for teachers of integrated contact improvisation, which I was observing that year. At the age of 17, Adi had been injured in a terror attack that took place on a bus she was riding on her way to high school when a bomb exploded and injured the left side of her body, her arm, leg, and head. Adi comes from what she called a dancing home and had always loved to dance. She had trained in ballet, modern dance, jazz, African dance, and salsa. Had started performing when she was 6 years old and danced many hours a day in high school. I'm always moving in my head, she told me as she offered me a piece of the cake she baked for our interview. I need the movement. Even when my right side was paralyzed, even then I danced. I danced with my left arm and leg. I didn't stop because of it. The injury also affected her ability to speak, read, and write, and she ended up spending the total of 5 years going to the hospital for rehabilitation, during which she relearned all those skills and eventually received her high school diploma. Following the accident, although she had lost her memory of everything else she had learned and known, as she said, 17 years were gone, she did remember dancing, even the meaning of terms such as plie. She spent 8 months in a wheelchair before walking again, slowly learning how to bend her right knee, going through rehabilitation in Israel and abroad against the advice of doctors who said she would probably never walk again. 2 years before we met, at the age of 29, Adi had started dancing again, first only in family celebrations, daring to dance with her injured knee she couldn't bend and risk falling. She had also started meeting disabled people from the IDF Veterans Center, joining tours and vacation. But when she auditioned for a dance group in a Veterans Center while still using a wheelchair, she received a negative reaction. She told me in our interview, I was in a wheelchair and went to their audition, and they said, you aren't appropriate for our group because you can only turn the wheelchair to one side. I could only roll to the right side and not the left. After a year, she was able to turn with the wheelchair in both directions. She went back. Can you drive people? Can they sit on your chair? She was asked. I said, yes, but not in a circle. I don't have this motion. And I wasn't accepted. And I really cried. And I decided I would never step in there again. I was trying to get into so many dance academies and programs and was rejected. Adi, therefore, was not able enough for the veterans dance groups, but she also wasn't accepted in non-integrated regular dance programs because of her atypical embodiment. Ironically, though, in social gatherings with other people with disabilities, she was considered the abled one because she has 2 legs and 2 arms and was always being mistaken as someone else's caretaker. This all changed when Adi learned about integrated dance and joined an integrated contact improvisation training, which as a whole focuses not on what everybody cannot do, but rather on the creative aesthetics of different embodiments. And indeed, in contrast to the exclusivity and hierarchy within many aspects of the disability community in Israel, integrated dance functions to diminish barriers, not only around disability, but also around ethnicity, nationality, and religion. And I'll share one example. This function of integrated dance was evidenced in an observation I conducted in a year-long school-based integrated dance program in Israel. Co-taught and director by a dancer with and a dancer without a disability, this project consisted of weekly meetings of a group of 15, 16-year-old high school dance students who met with a group of disabled youth from the same city to create an integrated dance piece they perform at the end of the year. The dance students came from varied backgrounds, religious and secular, upper and middle class, and had different bodies in terms of sizes and shapes. The group of youth with disabilities came from a special education school, which in this city includes both Jewish and Arab students from the east and west sides of the city. The 4th meeting was dedicated to what one of the 2 teachers who uses a wheelchair called a sharing weight laboratory, in which groups of students, each including 1 student with a disability, explore different techniques of tilting, giving, and sharing weight and maintaining balance. During the class, the students carefully investigated what their bodies could do together, how their different centers of gravity could meet, and how to use their bodies and equipment to create balance and weight-sharing possibilities. The instructors explained that the purpose of this laboratory was for the students to explore their movements options, as Tali, the non-disabled instructor, called them. This class then not only allowed the students to develop new bodily knowledge with the notion of what ability and disability mean, but also to build new connections and bridges across genders, nationalities, and religions. Students from the dance department and the high school as a whole met for the first time people their own age with disabilities, and even more than that in the context of dance. Gradually, through having physical contact with one another every week, shyness, fears, and hesitations between groups faded, and the dance students, mostly girls, started talking with the disabled youth not only about the dance choreography, but also about dating, parties, and everyday life. So to conclude these just short examples, I think that dance, including integrated dance, can function in different ways within different contexts. In Israel, it can reinforce social boundaries or diminish them, joining other forms of dance that challenge the canon, such as dance performed by older women or Palestinian artists. When breaking down boundaries and challenging binary ways of thinking, integrated dance is helpful in answering the anthropological puzzle of whether society can sustain equality alongside diversity, or as a scholar of anthropology of performance asked, in which ways the deeply different can be deeply known without becoming any less different. And I think that this can be nicely summarized in this video that I want to end with, which present one integrated dance program I studied, which really talks about this principle that is the basis of my studies. How can we be different together? So we'll see 3 minutes of this program, and then we can come back for the discussion. So I'll just do the stop share again and go to the video. One moment. I'll just open it in a new window. And take a notice on how the dancers really talk about bridging among ability and disability and bringing people of different abilities together. Okay, so I'll share the video.
גילינו שיש כוח אדיר בזה שאנחנו באים לקבוצה כצוות של 2. משהו נוסף קורה, משהו אולי יותר שלם.
בתוך הנקודה הזו הבנו שגם תוכנית ההכשרה שלנו צריכה להיות מורכבת ממשתתפים בעלי יכולות פיזיות שונות. התוכנית בעצם מציעה את המודל הזה שעבורנו הוא עובד מאוד טוב ב-17 שנים האחרונות.
השילוב הוא חיוני וחשוב כדי לטשטש את הגבולות, כדי לטשטש את השוני בעיניי. נכנסים למקום עם לב חשוף, שהכל יכול לקרות.
התוכנית השנתית יוצרת מקום מספיק רחב כדי באמת לחוות ולהעמיק בהרבה שכבות של מחול משולב.
כבר מהשיעורים הראשונים אני הרגשתי שהתשוקה והרצון שלי לצאת וללמד ולהנחות אוכלוסייה משולבת בקונטקט אימפרוביזציה הלך וגדל, ואני ממש מרגישה כבר שאני רוצה לצאת ולעשות את זה.
זה באמת מדהים לראות את הפתיחה של הדבר הזה. זאת אומרת, באמת באתי לכאן לא מתוך מחשבה שזה משהו שאני עשוי להתעסק איתו. פתאום אני מצא את עצמי, משחק עם הרעיון ומנסה לבדוק טוב מה כן עובד לי, מה אני כן רוצה לעשות בדבר הזה.
משהו מאוד חזק קורה במפגש הפשוט הזה.
מה אפשר לעשות ביחד כשאנחנו מאוד מאוד שונים, ויחד עם זאת מאוד משלימים אחד את השני.
Okay, we can open up for questions.
First, thank you so much, Gili. The videos are so powerful. I'm wondering, actually, if you can maybe, if there are other links that people that are public. I found it extraordinarily moving and beautiful, which I think, for me, political art is maybe important, but beauty is very important when you're talking about artistic forms, and the videos really underscore the beauty and the lyricism of this. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, and I think we would use those links. We have some questions. I'm going to actually start us going. I think sometimes people, it takes a little while. So I want to ask, I want you to actually, in this context, talk a little bit more about the role of dance as a folk medium in the Zionist project. And I think people may know about Israeli, quote, folk dancing, but I'd like you to talk a little about the cultural differences between sort of the standard folk dancing that people know and some of the Yemeni and non-Ashkenazic dance projects. How does cultural difference play out in your work? So that's one question for you to expand upon. And the other is, I'm not sure everyone heard or could see the distinction between the way a veteran, someone who's been injured in a war or pigua, something that's deemed a terrorist attack, how they are perceived by Israeli society versus someone who is disabled either through birth or something else that's not part of the military understanding. So if you could address those two big issues, and then we'll see what else is in the chat.
Okay, sure, thank you. I'll start with the second question. I can just illustrate with the story of Adi. Adi was at the same terror attack with other people at the bus. She actually lost 9 of her high school friends, and she was severely injured, as I described. And she received from the state a very small amount of money each month, while the same soldier who were at the same bus with her in the same terror attack received 4 times more. So because they just had the status of they were soldiers at the time. Just, you know, it's a coincidence. At the same terror attack, they were both severely injured. So this is an illustration of the differences, and then it's a huge difference of what you can do with the resources, or which community you have. Even just the fact that she went to do rehabilitation abroad, which was really meaningful in her ability to walk again, was something she has to raise money and use all the savings of the family. She doesn't come from a rich family. So it's a huge difference in terms of, you know, the amount of money people receive, the resources that they have, and also maybe even more interestingly for me as a sociologist, the social glory, the acceptance, you know, how people treat them in terms of just the norms and ideology. Like I said, it's more legitimate. People will feel less sorry about you. You would consider it more masculine. You can maybe escape, you know, the category, the stigmas of disability as dependency, as lack, through this more legitimate type of disability. And this is really a more Israeli feature of disability context and activism. And the first questions, so I think that it's not a coincidence that integrated dance is not very developed within folk dance, because folk dance is really more connected to this Israeli ableism, to this, when you see folk dance companies on stages in festivals, usually you see the very typical gender roles, for example, of men and women dancing and do the gender roles. It's much more conservative. It's much more, it sticks to boundaries. Even though you have wheelchairs on stage, it's still they have very traditional gender roles, very traditional types of movement, and you need to be somehow more abled than disabled. And with the integrated dance, all the different types that I studied, including ballet even, you have this more openness of freedom to change the normative aesthetics of how a body on stage should look, should move, should be, which types of equipment we should see, whether someone can, and I think you saw in the first video of Divide, that they really explored, you know, how we can learn, how the dancers can learn from the wheelchair, how they can get inspiration for their own legs. It's not, they are not trying to imitate the wheelchair. They really receive this inspiration on how to use their legs, and the dancer using the wheelchair really got inspiration from the non-disabled dancers. Together, they created this new aesthetic, these new ways of moving. So this is something that you will see less, at least in Israel, in folk dancing. And just very briefly, it's not my field, but dance scholars are really arguing that with time and very recently, the dance canon is changing in Israel. You see more Palestinian creators. There is a very famous group of older women who do wonderful professional dancing in Israel, of Galit Lis. I really recommend looking at it. So the canon is changing in general, but I think that integrated dance, because of this Israeli ableism and the specific feature of militaristic culture, is not part of it yet. It's still different.
I just want to add a little bit to what you said about your first, the issue of benefits for victims of a terror attack who are seen as military who are soldiers and therefore part of the military compensation and a civilian. I think some of this can be generalized. I think in the United States, sadly, I think these are one of the issues, compensation after 9/11, you know, and also the way, I mean, I'm not an expert in this, but I know it, and also we're commemorating, 20 years of this major terrorist attack in the Northeast, and questions of the way firefighters and security workers and police were treated versus, you can imagine, an undocumented immigrant whose family was working at Windows in the World. So there are some generalizations, even though they're very specific Israeli applications, because it's such a new state and because of also Zionism. And I say this not with any criticism, mind you. I'm an historian of European Jewry, the way in which Zionism challenged the image of the so-called East European Jew and the passivity and needed to invent this new masculinity. I mean, you can criticize it, it's fine as scholars, but it is part of the narrative and is part and parcel of Israeli culture. There's no way out of it. So I think it's fascinating to look at the way your work challenges some of these narratives, but there are some universal applications, I think, to it as
And it
well.
is important to mention that some of it has changed, just the law. The law was changed. Adi was injured in 2016, so it was before that. But afterward, so now people who were injured in terror attack also considered Nechei Tzahal, which is not exactly veterans, but they are included in the same group in
Right.
terms of benefits, in terms of memory. So the law has changed, and this also really changed community centers of veterans, because all of a sudden you have more women, you have types of injuries that you didn't see before. No one had studied this yet, what happens after the law has changed, but it's an important, it's an interesting thing to look at. And yes, you're right. And it's not only Zionism. You can also think about the history of feminism. At the beginning, the feminist movement really excluded women with disabilities,
Right.
because the movement wanted to move away from the stigmas of women as dependent, as weak. There is a lot of writing and testimonies of women with disabilities who really were excluded from the feminist movement at the beginning. So it's interesting.
Yeah, no, also on that, I mean, I want to take the question from the chat, but there's also, it strikes me that the research, again, has lots of implications, thinking about even our COVID moment. We think about people, God forbid, who died of COVID, but think about all the care providers who have been traumatized by the pandemic in terms of what they've experienced and witnessed. And this psychic trauma is going to have enormous implications for healthcare globally. So I think there are a lot of implications. I don't want to push my agenda about the ethnic thing. Someone else, we can ask it later, but someone wanted to know about integrative dance companies in the United States. Can you speak about those? Your examples were from Israel, and we wanted you to talk about Israel, obviously, but we're curious about what kind of dance companies in the States are doing this kind of work.
Yes, and usually I talk more about the States, actually. I'll do it on Tuesday. But actually, the first companies in the world were established in the United States. One of them was the ballet company I studied in Cleveland, which was already established in 1980. So it's really one of the first. And their director was really the first professional wheelchair user dancer in the world. She has this amazing story of how she, actually when she was born, the doctors advised her parents to leave her in the hospital because she's now older. At the time, it wasn't accepted to take children with disabilities, with severe disabilities home and take care of them. And she's a professional dancer. She's still performing. She's really amazing. And she's doing these amazing educational activities as well. So this is one example. And as I said, I also accompanied Axis Dance Company, which they are in the West Coast. And now you have more initiatives also in the East with the work of Alice Shepard, for example, who's located in New York City. So there are many dance companies in the United States. This is the reason I did my study there, because it's more established. You have more established professional dance companies. And of course, another place is the UK, which also many choreographers and creators are working in the UK. Also a very big important center is Chicago with the Momento Dance Company. Another one of the pioneer dancer and choreographer is from there. So when I talk about the States, I also look a little bit about the differences between, the West Coast and the Midwest, or the differences between styles of dance. But for sure, this phenomenon is established and going for many years in the United States.
There also in the States, there were companies, I think part of, again, attention to between ableism and disableism is the racial inflection, thinking about the early African-American companies, Dance Theater of Harlem and Alvin Ailey, and then now, of course, Bill T. Jones. And this question of the canon, who gets to dance, who gets to represent a body on stage, and you have younger, Bill T. Jones is no longer young, but Bill T. Jones and Arnie Zane Company was really cutting edge for incorporating different sizes. It wasn't disability, but different sizes of dancers. And and I'm sure Ballet Hispanico, you have ethnic troupes that challenge the canon, but it's slow to develop. But yeah, great.
Also,
go ahead, please.
At least between the United States and the UK, there's a big difference in the amount of money or support you can get from the states. So and this is also a difference between Israeli ableism and in the United States, because it is a welfare country, Israel. So it's still stipend from the states are very strong, are very central here. So it's another difference. Also, how much the state support the art, which in the UK.
Wait. So you're saying in Israel, the state supports the arts more robustly than in the United States? Is that what you're saying? Or yeah, absolutely.
And in the UK, even much more.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think many people don't understand that arts in the United States are fragile. You may have a great creative class of people, such a big society, but there's very little state support. It requires philanthropic patronage and other things. Yes, it's yeah. I mean, the arts are much better supported in Europe, UK, and Israel. People don't really understand that. It makes a difference, right? Why we can have so many amazing modern dance companies in Tel Aviv. People can live, they have universal health care. Okay, I probably should. Anyway, so Gili, is there any concluding comments you want to make before I tell people about some other programs that we have for this coming fall?
No, I just really invite you to explore this more. I'll send the links.
Great.
It's a really global and developing phenomenon all over the world, in Australia, in Canada, in Japan. And I think that the final comment I would say is that I see it not just as a specific case study, but really as an opportunity to rethink differences, to rethink multiculturalism, to bring the body into the way we considered multiculturalism and disability, which is not the default. We are used to think of race, gender, and class usually, and we have to include disability. And it's just a wonderful way to rethink really how to be different together.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Gili Hammer, Associate Professor at the Hebrew University. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us. For our public at the Bildner Center, I want to give you a heads up of upcoming programs. This Thursday, we will have the launch of a digital exhibit that was created by Professor Jonathan Deckel-Chen, also of the Hebrew University, on Jewish agriculturalism in the Garden State. So it's a very local project on the history of Jewish farming, dairy and chicken and poultry farming in New Jersey. Starting on November 29th, we have a 3-session mini course, Women in Yiddish Literature, be taught by Dr. Anita Norwich, who is emerita from University of Michigan. The Rutgers Jewish Film Festival is running virtually and with some in-person events. Yes, at the Garden Theater and other places from November 7th to 21. And we have, as usual, a terrific lineup of films, and we'll have wonderful speakers, including film directors and actors. So please look on the website. And finally, in December, we're going to have a book talk, an in-person book talk by Professor Leah Garrett of Hunter College about her new book, Ex-Troop, The Secret Jewish Commandos of World War II. So a full range of very different kinds of programs meeting the needs of our really diverse public. And what a great way to start. Gili, thank you so very much.
Thank
Any
you.
questions, people? Sorry, go ahead.
No, it was my pleasure. Thank you.
So everyone, just look on the website of the Bildner Center. You know where to find us. And thank you so much. Be well. Gili, I'll see you on Tuesday.
Thank you. Bye-bye.